Welcome to Thrive on Mission, the podcast of the Christian Restoration Association. As always, I'm Dave Jones with the Millwood Church of Christ, and our associate director from the CRA is Jim Book. Jim, it's great to see you today. Where are you?
Oh, it's good to see you, Dave, as always. Well, I am coming to you from the Comfort Inn in Barboursville, West Virginia, doing a revival with Jason Thomas out here at the Farmdale Church of Christ. And we've had a great revival so far. Looking forward to finishing this and then heading to Garner, North Carolina to be with the Christian church out there in Garner where Bobby Wallace, it's a church plant, and we'll be there in the weekend and then head home. So all is good in West Virginia. Yeah.
Both great evangelists, very familiar with both of them and really excited for the work they're doing. You're doing a good work going to these churches, preaching revivals, and really sending the message of the CRA and Mission 120. And I caught a post on Facebook. There's a church that you and I are both familiar with, Congregation of Christ. Ryan Williams is the evangelist, and they've really just caught the Mission 120 vision. And they are, here's a really neat next level. We've talked before about the importance of inviting people to church and then having some sort of membership class, but they are doing an in-home Bible study, Ryan and his wife, just 4 or 5 weeks for individuals that are brand new to the church, sort of a member orientation process, getting to know others in the church, and it's called Foundations. And I'd love to get their curriculum, maybe put it on the CRA website for the Mission 20 churches. And my suggestion, by the way, would be that he's our game ball winner this week, Ryan Williams.
Absolutely. And I had gotten this email from Ryan, and he's like, Jim, I just want you to know we launched Mission 120 5 weeks ago. We've had a number of baptisms. He goes, our elders are totally on board with this vision of focused, intentional growth. And they're doing a great job. And I'm so glad that he's our game ball recipient. And I love, and that's a tough area. Northern Virginia is not the easiest to evangelize. But the beauty of the message of Christ is it transcends times, it transcends culture. And I've always thought if Paul can launch a church in the decadent cities of Ephesus and Corinth, we can do it in Northern Virginia. So kudos to those guys.
Yeah, that game ball $25 gift certificate to the CRA bookstore. And I might note that they are big supporters of the CRA, and within the past couple of years, got a Recycled Riches loan, totally renovated the building, and just repurposed an older facility for new work in the church.
Ryan sent me a couple of pictures of the new look, and Jeanette and I are going to actually be with them the second weekend in October for a 3-day rally. So I'll get a chance to visit with them firsthand. But yeah, what we see coming from that church is great. And Ryan will be the first to tell you, Dave, nothing magic. There's no, some pragmatic wand they wave over the audience. They're just fully committed to the ACTS model for church growth.
We're going to talk about being a vital part of a healthy community. It's the second characteristic of a biblically sound and culturally relevant church. Last time, in our last episode, we talked about how we balance good deeds and good news and remaining doctrinally pure while still having a social mindset for the community in which we live. And so the second characteristic, being a vital part of a healthy community, Jim, why is this so important to you and to the work of the local church?
Well, again, I was blessed to speak in Inverness, Florida last week. It was a 1-day trip, drove down, met all day with the elders and the leadership. Even some of the deacons were able to make the meeting. And I said, okay, let's make sure we know we got a good message, but how are we taking the message and interacting with good deeds? And so they went through some of the externally focused programs they were doing, which was great. But I was like, okay, now how does that great program, how are we connecting the church with that? Okay, so it's great that you have these events on your property, but are we able to convey to them the message of the church at the same time? And it's funny because the more they sat and they thought, they're like, you know what, we could be more intentional, right? I said, absolutely. You have to see this, though, as a segue to the baptistry. Okay, so that helps us understand good deeds and good messages. They go together. So this next point of a strong, healthy church, churches see themselves as a vital piece of the community. So again, it goes back to that question. If your church closed tomorrow, would the community miss you? Well, if your answer is, Jim, I don't even know if the community knows we're here, then you've already answered the question. You're not a vital piece of the community. You're not a vital piece of the community. I have always wanted to be a part of a church that the community would rise up and say, we don't know what would we do without you. And so I used to tell the people at Kissimmee, I was like, hey, if we closed tomorrow, we'd have 250 parents that would have a place for their kids to go to school. I said, I want that. That's how we want to be. I said, we'd have 135 Haitians that wouldn't have a place to congregate. So let's make sure that we have made ourselves so known and have such an influence in this community that even the secular people would go, you know what? Kissimmee is doing a great job. We would miss you. Even if we're not a part of your church, even if we're an unbeliever, we appreciate the impact you're making on people's lives. And Tony Evans, in his book, Kingdom Citizen, said, since the church is the primary manifestation of the kingdom and is the primary means by which God is extending his kingdom rule in this world, local churches must consider what they can do to bring about positive outcomes in society and even in the political arena. And I know the church that I'm ministering at tonight, Farmdale Church of Christ. There's a sitting delegate, I think, in West Virginia that goes to this church. I was preaching at LifeBridge Christian Church in Decatur, Alabama, and a lady was there and she was running for county commission. And after the service, I found out. And I called her over and I said, let's pray with you right now. Let's pray that God will bless your campaign because this church has made an impact in your life. So now you, as the church, can make an impact in the county commission. And she won by a handful of votes. But again, this is how the church sees themselves. Look, without us, this county, this city is worse off. They're better off with us. And so Evans concludes that thought by saying the crying need today is for churches to become discipleship training centers for developing their members to become kingdom disciples who actually learn as they progress in their faith how to bring all of life under the lordship of Christ. So as you grow up, as you progress in life, you begin to see your church as being a vital part of every aspect of that community.
I like the line that you have in your book. We must see ourselves as the soul of our local community. And a lot of times in churches, we are negligent of our community, where we almost have built some fortress that allows people to come in on Sundays to find safety and protection. Why have we cut ourselves off in the church that way, do you think?
Well, okay, then that's a great question. And I'll answer it this way. When I was growing up, we had a great church. It was very conservative. My dad was my preacher, but when I think back at my home church, I think it suffered a little bit from what I call myopic thinking. We were very happy. We had a great church. It was a small church. We knew everybody. We went to each other's homes, holidays. We did everything together. And it was just kind of like an extension to our nuclear family with our church family. Here's the problem, though. We became so comfortable with each other that we never said this, or would we ever, but it was a little uncomfortable when people came in because now we have to make room for them. And of course, we would have never said we don't have room for you. We would have never said it overtly. But I think by our myopic thinking and our, this is kind of a, so hyperly internal that we fail to be externally motivated, that we got very comfortable with that tight knit family mentality. So we actually neglected, I think, being more externally focused, more intentional about reaching lost people. Number two, let's face it, when you start bringing outsiders in or you become very aggressive in bringing outsiders, you don't just get outsiders, you get their baggage. Oh my goodness. We've got a mom with 3 kids, husband left her. Ooh, now we got to get into her weeds. We got to find a way to help provide some babysitting service or maybe some financial assistance to this woman. And that's going to cost us some money. And, we would never tell her no. But again, we just getting into the weeds of people's lives, it's a burden. But those are exactly the things we're supposed to do. Now, Dave, you used an interesting word. You used the word fortress. And I immediately recall this passage in 2 Corinthians 10. Paul says, though we walk in the flesh, we don't war according to the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, they're not secular, but rather mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. And of course, the strongholds that the church has to face now are much the same as the early church. Some are different. I think the transgender movement is a stronghold that the church needs to address. Sexual promiscuity is continuing to rise, cohabitive living, sexual expressive audience. These are strongholds that the church still needs to address. You can't do that if in a stained glass foxhole. You have to be very aggressive, but a vital part of the community means you're not afraid to address these issues. And then Paul says, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So the arguments are the strongholds. He says pulling down strongholds. I did a study of the word strongholds, and that's actually a Greek word that Paul uses to describe. There was so if the walls of a city came down, they would move the political leaders, the president and his family, to this tower. It's in in a high range part of the town, and it was a strong fortress that would give them protection if the enemy breached the wall. But notice Paul says those have to come down, and I'm like, wait a minute, we should want a stronghold, we should want a fortress. Paul says sometimes strongholds represent what? Comfort zones. It's easy street. And he says sometimes we have to start dreaming big and becoming uncomfortable. These strongholds, they look like a place of security, but these security blankets have become a terrible habit for churches because we don't dream and pray big anymore. We're safely in our zones. We've got a safe little congregation made up of us, the same healthy people that we've been around for 25 years. All the bills are paid. Okay. Buildings paid for, everything's paid for. That's a stronghold. Paul says dangerous. It's become too comfortable for your church. Those need to come down. And it's you use the word fortress, Dave, but they're much the same. And so I'm challenging churches, hey, maybe you need to become uncomfortable in your vision and cast a vision big enough where it's going to fail if God's in it. But you can't cast a vision and be comfortable at the same time. It's impossible.
As I look back on my ministry, Jim, I could think of my preaching, even our style as a church. And two words come to mind very quickly. I think legalism was very prominent in our church, and moralism. And
now, what do you mean by that?
By moralism?
When I hear moralism, I immediately like, that's the church you want to have. You want to have a very moralistic church. So you're telling me that was a stronghold you needed to massage a little bit?
Massage, not necessarily tear it all the way down.
Okay.
We want the morality as espoused in the Bible, but it was very moralistic from a judgmental perspective.
Oh, okay. Right.
If you're not here, if you're not doing this, if you've done this, then there's no room for you here. And generally that kind of preaching would repel people. It wouldn't invite them in. I'm just reminded of the many times Jesus interacted with the outcasts of society, the lepers, the woman at the well, the people that nobody else wanted to talk to. Jesus would talk to them. And I just go back to this concept that you introduced to me, lead with grace, land with truth. And so we always have to have love at the forefront of what we're doing. And while we want to point out sin as sin and call people to repentance, we can't forget that even if they get rid of their sin and they repent, it's still grace that saves them.
Absolutely.
We want to point them to the love of Jesus, and nobody really changes until Jesus changes their hearts.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to grow in as a church. And I am, all these years later, trying to grow in as a preacher. I had a gentleman in our congregation come up to me a few years ago, and he's been a part of this change over the years, trying to help people understand how to live lives that Jesus would want them to live, leading with grace, though, and landing on truth. He said, I knew we arrived when I saw the woman with the purple hair 2 weeks in a row.
Yes. All right. Right.
And prior to that time, she had a lot of tattoos. Prior to that time, I don't think she would have felt comfortable here. And
yes.
And now I want people to feel comfortable here. It sort of goes to that old saying that the church is a hospital, not a country club. And
yes.
we had created a country club of people like us. And we want to create a hospital where wounded souls come and get Jesus.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dave, I'll tell you, it's easy to become complacent. It's easy to become judgmental, to the point where bringing that group of people in and spending time with them can be exhausting. I get it. But when I read the Gospels, I think to myself, man, Jesus had 3 years of ministry in his arsenal. He lived 33 years, but he had only 3 years of what we call concentrated ministry. But you look at the people he spent most of his time with, not the religious elite, not the eggheads. He spent it with people who absolutely were considered the dredge of society, the outcasts, but he saw the potential in them. And I would just encourage churches, you will never experience the true joy of ministry until you reach the outcast. And again, I use this quote. I think John Wesley said, "You will never lack for an audience at your church service if you learn how to preach to hurting people." And most of us, all of us, are hurt at some level. Okay. But it was the grace of Jesus Christ that brought us out of whatever sin we were in. It doesn't matter the amount of sin, but we were changed. And literally, it took churches that didn't mind investing us. I don't know what author it was who wrote this, but he said we have to stop defining sin as just doing wrong. Sin is often neglecting to do what is right. And a church that sees themselves as a vital piece of a healthy community understands the difference between not just doing wrong, but the absence of what I should do and don't do. So yeah, let's practice a little more of that thinking too.
So Jim, there's a attitude shift that occurs, needs to occur if we're going to look at ourselves as a vital piece of what's going on in the local community. Helping one term is to be the soul of the community, of course, and have access and influence with those individuals. What are some practical ways the church can do that? Not just the attitude that we have toward it, but practical ways we could actually help the community in which we live.
Good question. One thing we tried to do is partner with the secular world where we could, because I knew if the secular world saw us as not an enemy, even though philosophically we differ, okay, they may have no propensity for faith. I wanted to let them know not every preacher was evil, not every preacher, was after their money or, was going to clobber them with the Bible. So I tried to find common ground. And one thing we did that I thought was very effective was in the area of foster care. The fostering program in Osceola County was hemorrhaging. They were like crying out, we need more foster parents. So I met with the secular people. And even though we disagreed on worldview, I said, look, if you really want help in fostering, you got to become friends with the faith-based community. You got to be friends with the church. You may not agree with us on our doctrinal stands. You may differ on the integrity of scripture, the validity of Christ, but the faith-based community is a large section of people that you should befriend if you really want to help kids get into good homes. And so they listened. And I said, Kissimmee Christian, we've got to start. We can't preach unless we're ready to do it. So we started fostering our future. And we begin to incorporate a desire to foster kids within our church. Not everybody's cut out for it, but some people are. And we begin to see families go through the program, and the state begin to see, hey, you guys are good people. And so we begin to realize, look, the church should be on the cutting edge, and we begin to expand it to other churches. We encourage them to jump on board. And before long, we had 4 or 5 large churches, conservative-based churches, working in conjunction with the county. We even petitioned our House member, conservative Republican House member in Tallahassee, to sponsor a bill that would help faith-based foster care people receive some of the same aid that the secular companies did. And we won. And but we were aggressive, but kind. Another thing that we did was when I got a call from the county, would you consider opening up your church 4 times a year? It's called the Identity Program. We bring in all state agencies and multiple agencies for one Friday, and we help people in Osceola County get their license, their birth certificate, all in one day, and their social security card, which normally would take you weeks. We could do it in one day. We could actually help the hurting in this county get the necessary paperwork so they can get gainfully employed. And you couldn't believe the number of people that came to our church 4 times. But I would walk the aisles and I would be planting the seed of the gospel. So we came across one lady. She was there to get her social security card. So I started talking to her, and she's like, hey, preacher, I want you to know, I think 15 years sober. And I was like, 15 years sober? That's awesome. I said, let me ask you a question. Are you a Christian? She's like, well, I don't know. So I started talking about plan of salvation, right? Now she's just there to get her license. She's not there to talk about Jesus, but she's not going to turn the preacher down because it's his church, right? That's how she's bought. Well, she started coming to church. Then she started coming to Celebrate Recovery. Now she's 30, she's 15 years sober, but she's smart enough to know if I don't have someone pouring into me, I can hit the bottle again. I baptized her. Now, outside the fact she'd sit on the front row, go to sleep every Sunday, she was there every Sunday. And I realized it was through that iDignity program. They were all coming to get Social Security cards and get their license. Well, we turned it as an opportunity to evangelize. Our people were there. And I said, guys, when you come and volunteer, work the audience, let them know who you are, plant the seed. So again, I knew we were a vital part of the community because they needed our church so they could help people in the community get their paperwork in one afternoon. But we took it to another level. We said, okay, they're here on the county's dime. Let's intersect this crowd with Jesus. And we did. Plus, it gave our people an opportunity, an outlet. They were exhausted, but they're like, man, we feel like we've done something for our community and for the Lord. And the county was so appreciative. Like, Jim, this church seems to always open itself. I said, that's what we want to do. We want you to love us so much, even if you don't agree with our doctrine. We want you to walk away going, Jim Book's an idiot. Church is full of, Bible thumping maniacs. But you know what? What would this town be without Kissimmee Christian Church?
That's great. Love that.
It was fun, man. It was fun. It was crazy, but it was fun.
Terry Pierre told me a story one time of a church he was ministering in, and they approached the county. This is in a small community. They approached the county about doing a food distribution day once a month for people in their local area. And the county agreed, but they actually put conditions on the church and said, you cannot use this as an opportunity to evangelize. Terry said, here's what we're doing. We're going to bring them inside to line up, and they have to come into the auditorium and sit in the pews and work their way around. And then Terry spent the morning along with others getting to know people. And then if they would ask about the church, he had permission to do it because they asked. So that was one way to partner with the state, if you will. And the state didn't want them to proselytize their faith, even though they were in the church building. So Terry said, well, we're going to do it in an indirect way. And it worked very effectively for them in the time that he was there.
I love that creative thinking. When Jesus was on the parade route and the Pharisees said, tell the people to stop saying Hosanna, said, so the people could stop, but the rocks are going to cry out. I just think, hey, let's get creative. You're not going to tell me I can't give Jesus credit for something. I'll find a way, even around your ideology, to make sure Jesus gets the credit he deserves. And that's just, well, that was the Dave, that was the propensity behind and the energy behind starting Celebrate Recovery. I ran an NA meeting at Winter Park, 70 people every Sunday night after service. I couldn't even go in and invite them just to, if you want to meet with me and take your recovery to another level, I'm the preacher here. I'll be happy. You don't have to, but if just know, here's my number. I want to help you. And he said, Jim, I can't let you do that. NA and AA won't let preachers or any people from the religious community in to proselyte. And it was that conversation that challenged me to start Celebrate Recovery at Kissimmee, because I wanted to control the narrative and I wanted Jesus Christ to be front center. I like the concepts of AA and NA, but I don't like any concept that intentionally eclipses Jesus Christ, because he's the ultimate hope. And so I said to our elders at Kissimmee, we have to start a recovery program, but it has to be one where we can inculcate the gospel and watch number of people baptized into Christ. One story, Dave, I was in a Cracker Barrel restaurant just before I retired from Kissimmee, and this beautiful waitress walked up. She's like, Mr. Book, do you remember me? And I was like, you know what? Help me out here. I don't. She told me your name. She said, you sat down with me and helped me see the light of day. You put me through your Celebrate Recovery ministry. You sat down and you helped me understand the plan of salvation. And I said, I do know who you are, because she didn't want to be baptized. She didn't think it was essential for salvation. And I said, okay, if you'll just sit down with me one time and just be an honest seeker, let me walk you through the plan of salvation, I think you'll change your mind. Well, she was baptized that night. She had no relationship with a mom or a child because of her drug addiction. She is so clean now. She's restored a relationship with her daughter. She goes to church every Sunday with her mom, and she's now the assistant manager of the most highly visible Cracker Barrel on 192 outside of Celebration and not far from Disney World. And she said, I'm clean and I'm healthy. It was because of the church. And I thought, we're a vital part of her recovery. She wouldn't have recovered, I don't think, had it not been for the church and our extension into her life through Celebrate Recovery. So I'm saying, hey, we had to get in the weeds with her. I mean, she was a troubled soul, man. She was a mess. She was an addict. But boy, what a change. I mean, I didn't even recognize her. She was so healthy and clean. and on top of things. And then she told me, and I said, I do remember you. So yeah, it's just great, Dave. Those stories are real, and every church can experience them.
I wonder if in our churches, if we've become so, quote, doctrinally pure, we exclude every opportunity that's not book, chapter, verse. And
Yes.
we end up doing, for example, Celebrate Recovery comes from a more of a faith only
Yep.
background. You invited some guys to edit that material so that it could be used to teach the gospel plan of salvation.
I
And
remember sitting down with Cubby Wise. Cubby Jr. is the senior minister at Monroeville, and Cubby, his dad, is one of the most doctrinally sound men I have. And we got permission from Saddleback to massage it to fit the New Testament plan of salvation. They talk about baptism. They don't put the emphasis on it that I think the scriptures do. But Cubby went through, made the changes. We got permission from them to do it so we could articulate it properly. And Dave, I love the phrase that I know it's been around for a while, but I don't know. I don't remember hearing it till you said it. Eat the fish and throw out the bones, or something on that
yeah,
line. It's
yeah.
like, why can't we do that more often? There's good meat. Just throw out the bones. And so I've said this before. A number of times I would go on Monday night to witness a baptism. I didn't have any part to do with it. I didn't lead Celebrate Recovery. I cheerleaded for it all the time, but I can remember them calling like, Jim, are you in the area? Come up on a Monday night. We got a baptism. We've had a person that's been working on their recovery, but through the recovery, they were introduced to Jesus Christ, the plan of salvation, and then the church. And I was like, wild horses couldn't get me from being at the auditorium and celebrating this event. Again, we saw ourselves as a vital piece of our community, a healthy community, by the way. And I've said this before: Minneapolis, Minnesota, San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, California. Yeah, they need a lot of political overhaul. They need a lot of economic recovery. But the biggest problem with those cities is the missing church. The church of Christ is absent in those communities. You bring a vibrant, healthy church into those states, in those cities, it'll change. It'll change.
That's good. Earlier, I mentioned this idea of moralistic teaching. I thought of a good example. I was challenged early on by somebody who said, I appreciate your stance on abortion, but what are you actually doing as a church to help stop abortions in your community? And one of the reasons we weren't a part of our pregnancy center at the time is because they too have more of a faith only leaning. And what we were able to do just from that challenge and involvement of people within the church. One of our ladies became a board member with our local pregnancy center. We have multiple people now that have become counselors in the pregnancy center. So we've actually become a key sponsoring organization for our pregnancy center in the community, all because somebody really just challenged me and said, it's great that you're teaching what's true about abortion, but what are you actually doing to solve the problem?
Yeah.
And I think churches are very quick to point fingers and to put labels on sin, which we need to identify, but we also have to help people get out of that trap of sin. That passage you referred to from 2 Corinthians there, where it really is alluding to the idea that these strongholds are spiritual strongholds.
Yes.
And
Yes.
until we realize we're not fighting this physical battle against sinners in the world, but we're actually trying to rescue sinners in the world from the hands of Satan, the
Yes.
evil one. We're trying to bring them into the grace of Jesus Christ. Until we have a heart to win people to Jesus Christ, I don't think we are going to be a healthy part of our communities.
And I think you hit on the head. We've got to have a heart, before Jesus fed the 5,000, Matthew is very clear to point out he had compassion on them. My initial thought is, who cares? Just feed them. We don't care what your attitude is. Well, you know what? You can be an auto mechanic and have a terrible attitude. I don't care. Just fix my car. You can be a doctor and have a terrible bedside manners as long as you cure me my illness. But we don't have the luxury in the church of saying, "Well, that's a big church, but just they don't love people. But it's okay. I love the praise team. I love their kids program." No, it does matter what motivates us. And I think the gospel writer made it a point to say before he fed them, he had compassion on them. And so I would just say, back up a little bit, back up a lot maybe, and fall in love with the people that you're ministering to. Fall in love with your community. In his book, How Now Shall We Live, Colson says this, and I think this dovetails, Dave, to what you're talking about, of making sure that we aren't so heavenly minded we're no earthly good. Okay. Colson says we need prayer meetings. We have to have our Bible studies and times of corporate worship and fellowship. But if we focus exclusively on these disciplines, and if in the process we ignore our responsibility to redeem the surrounding culture, then he says our Christianity will remain privatized and marginalized. Turning our backs on the culture is really a betrayal of our biblical mandate and our own heritage because it denies God's sovereignty over everything. So if we're not careful, we'll minimize ourselves to where we become irrelevant to a dying world. And that's the last thing we can afford as a church and local community, is to be irrelevant. But if we're biblical and we love people, we will be relevant, no question.